Welcome into the Big City Sports Podcast. We have another episode coming up, and today we have a lot of things that have happened. First of all, the Brooklyn Nets have gotten eliminated. They're eliminated from the postseason. They ended up losing to Milwaukee. That was a tough series there. And then you also look at the Islanders. We're going to get into them. They survived by the skin of their teeth in Game 6. They're going to be playing Game 7 in Tampa Bay. But before all that, we're going to get into the Brooklyn Nets right off the jump. But before all of that, Swig, how you doing?
Pretty good, man. Pretty good. I had a eventful Father's Day weekend. It was a nice little break from work, and I was watching the Islanders Game 4 and that Brooklyn and Milwaukee Game 7 at the bar, which was pretty entertaining. Those were both really interesting finishes, I guess both of those series have gone a little bit different than a lot of people expected.
Oh, 100%. I was actually listening to the games on the way home from Wrigley Field on Saturday. So I was in the car jumping back and forth. And I actually thought of this idea I'm going to pitch to Steve Cohen, who does Sirius XM radio programming. But I was ticked that you couldn't listen to multiple games at once. Like the big moments are happening. I'm sitting there going, I'm hearing the Islanders announcer go nuts about a big Ryan Pulak save that you're just picturing that he just blocks a shot to save the game. And then you go back and then KD was his foot on the line or not. You're thinking, oh my gosh, so much excitement happening. And I was listening to both of the games. Somehow I found a way to get both of them together. But I mean, it's crazy how much has taken place in these series. But looking at Brooklyn and what happened in their series, I mean, Kevin Durant, he was a straight up baller. I mean, that's one word to describe him. He put the team on his back and just went absolutely nuts in that series. And I know the Brooklyn Nets came up on the short end, and we mentioned them pushing their chips in when they traded Jared Allen and tried to build this super team. But James Harden a little banged up. Kyrie could not play. What did you see out of this Nets team?
The injuries, I think, were the biggest factor. I'm not a person who likes to make too many excuses for teams that fall up short or come up short. And obviously, the Nets aren't the only team in the NBA playoffs who are dealing with pretty significant injuries right now. But at the same time, I think it's no doubt a valid part of the reason they ended up coming up short. Give credit to Milwaukee, won a very interesting series after it looked like Brooklyn might just run them out of the building at the beginning. But after the last time we recorded was after Durant was incredible in Game 5. Game 6 was relatively one-sided Milwaukee's favor, and then Durant was again ridiculous in Game 7. If he had my feet, Brooklyn moves on that last shot there. But the supporting cast with Harden kind of on one leg and not the same at the end of the series, Irving out. Yeah, as amazing as Durant was, the supporting cast wasn't as effective with only 1.5 stars healthy instead of 3. There was a lot more isolation in the offense, and we'll get into Joe Harris' struggle specifically, I'm sure, but a lot of guys missed some open shots, and Milwaukee took just enough advantage in a low-scoring overtime in Game 7 to pull off the upset.
Blake Griffin shot the ball well. It seemed like he was knocking down threes every single time you looked up. I mean, he was playing well, but the minutes are something that I look at, and the depth of this team was really tested in this 7-game series. And you look at James Harden, he played 57 minutes, as did Kevin Durant. They mentioned James Harden, and they said once he gets that hamstring going, he's got to go. He's got to go. He can't sit on the bench and then get it started back up again. So when you're dealing with that, once it's underway, he's got to continue to roll. So that's why he played so many minutes, even barring a leg injury where he was running up and down the court, looked about 70% at best when it comes to his health playing the game. But to your point, Joe Harris was absolutely abysmal. That's someone you need to step up in a Game 7. You saw Atlanta with Kevin Huerter step up. He made big plays right there, and he stepped up when you needed him most. Joe Harris, he sort of just fell under the radar and didn't really do too much in that big game when you needed him to knock down some clutch shots.
You got to have that white guy that can make threes in the corner, huh? The Harris struggled for most of this. What'd you say?
Shane Battier did it.
Oh, hey, come on now. I mean, Harris struggled for most of the series, especially after they won the first two games. He was pretty shaky game three and on. I want to say he shot 18% from three in the last 5 games. I mean, this is a far cry from the guy who shot 48% from three in the regular season. We know how elite of a shooter he is, but he has struggled in the playoffs a couple of years in a row. And I don't want to pin all of this on him. He knows he did not have a great series. And obviously, if Harden was at 100% and Irving was playing, yeah, then there would have been a lot less pressure on him. And frankly, Brooklyn probably would have won the series much easier. But you have to play with the cards you're dealt. You mentioned the depth of the team was tested. I'd argue that started way back at the beginning of the year when Spencer Dinwiddie got hurt in the third game of the season. And he's probably gone, by the way. He already declined his player option. And it's kind of hard to bring him back when he wants $20 million a year and you have three guys on max salaries already. But starting there, it was a revolving door that continued through the playoffs with Irving, Harden, Jeff Green missed some time. I want to say the Nets had 27 different players. I think I read that earlier. 27 different guys suit up for at least one game this year. NBA rosters are only 15, so they had to deal with a lot. They did a pretty good job weathering the storm for most of the season, but Milwaukee's three stars were healthy in that playoff series, and they did enough to advance.
I think that was the biggest factor. I mean, health and depth really plays when you get into the postseason and late into the postseason at that. And you mentioned that about 27 players, and we think back to the trade that they made early on, where we said, okay, we were on this show as like, are the Nets going to trade for Harden? I believe we had Anthony come on for that, and we're sitting here thinking, man, are they going to do it? They end up pushing their chips in on that front. They trade Karis LeVert. They traded also Jarrett Allen. So two big names, two big depth pieces that I said they should have kept on. But regardless, hindsight's 2020. You got to understand they did go in, they brought in the stars, and I think barring a Kyrie Irving injury, they're probably hosting a shiny piece of metal over their heads right now. But it's just the depth was tested. Bruce Brown ended up playing 47 minutes, and he's someone that was buried on the depth chart to begin the season. So definitely needed to test that depth, and it didn't really show late into the season.
Yeah, they took flyers on so many guys. We saw things. Bruce Brown was way better than expected. I mean, there's some other depth guys that we can talk about. The big questions are who are they gonna bring back between Brown, Jeff Green, and Blake Griffin. Those are the three biggest ones. But you could look deeper on the bench to Tyler Johnson or to Luwawu Cabarro or even Mike James. I mean, there's so many guys. We haven't even mentioned LaMarcus Aldridge's brief cameo with Brooklyn yet.
That's right.
They went through everybody, and I understand why. And they're at the front of the line now for anyone who gets bought out. People are looking for a championship. I think Brooklyn going forward is in pretty good shape to mostly run it back. I mean, they're absolutely still going to have these stars who are still under contract for at least one more year. Joe Harris is still signed. They still have Nick Claxton as well. The rest of the roster, we'll see. I think a couple of these guys might be willing to take veterans minimum discounts to stay with the team and have a chance for a ring. We might see some other veterans do the same thing. We've seen it with David West in the past, for example, or just about anyone wherever LeBron's ever played. And the Nets do have that same kind of star power. So there's still a lot of optimism for the future. As much as they did go all in at the trade deadline, I don't think this was their only chance to win a championship. And considering the condensed schedule, the short off season, I think it's fair to question how much of that contributed to all these injuries we're seeing across the league. There's going to be less of that going into next season. And hopefully for Brooklyn's sake, that'll lead to less injuries.
That's fair. That's fair. That's actually a good point. You look at the shortened look at the offseason now. It's going to feel more real. You're going to have time to ramp it back up. You're not going to be playing a limited amount of games, and you see the players on the roster. And one thing that really stuck out to me was Kevin Durant coming off the Achilles and what he was able to do this year. I know there's a chance he probably could have came back in the bubble last year. He said, "I'm not playing in 2020." So wise move on his front. Finally got back to full health in 2021, and he's just a dominant basketball player. When you don't see a star out for a while and then you see him again, just how great they are, you sort of forget about him a little bit. One name that comes to mind to me in Major League Baseball is Steven Strasburg. He had that Tommy John, sort of fell off a little bit, and then bam, hits you right back. Now he's old, but regardless on that point, Kevin Durant, he's played fantastic this year, and he's gonna continue that success later on in his career because I mean he's just an athletic freak.
One of the best players of all time. And we weren't sure, just because of how serious that ruptured Achilles was that he suffered the finals with the Warriors, if he would ever get back to that point. And he was out for one full season. I agree it was wise on his part not to come back in the bubble last year. I don't think it would have been worth it. But coming back at full strength, and I don't think we really saw that completely dominant Kevin Durant, because we didn't need to in the
Mhm.
regular season. He had the supporting cast. He did miss some games here and there. They all did. But once he was 100%, yeah, he's that guy saving it for the playoffs. And game 5 was an absolute vintage performance. And I think vintage might not even be the proper word, because I think it's proof that he never lost it in the first place. He just had to wait to be healthy again. He absolutely dominated. When he plays like that, you can make the argument he's the best player in the world. He has his moments at the very least to being the best scorer. So definitely want to give a shout out to him. He was ridiculous, especially in games 5 and 7. But unfortunately for him and the Nets, the Harden injury that limited him, the Kyrie Irving sprained ankle that kept him out for the last 3 games, everything finally was just enough to knock him out, despite Durant's heroics and that ridiculous shot to force overtime. It's a tough end to a disappointing season, considering they wanted a championship. But Brooklyn's not done, and wanted to get your input. I know they gave up a lot of draft picks in the Harden deal, but you can only trade first rounders every other year. So they got a first rounder at the end of the upcoming draft. Do you think they're going to end up trading that for either cap relief for another supporting player?
I could see it more on cap relief as opposed to bringing someone else in. I think you trade someone off, maybe you get DeAndre Jordan off the books, try to get someone to take that deal or whoever wants it. I mean, maybe Chicago, they don't have their first round pick anymore. That one's going to Orlando after the results of the lottery. But what happens there is you could see a team like them just really a backup big. I know they have Vucevic there, but just someone that could be a backup there and can accumulate another first round pick that they ended up giving up for someone like a Vucevic. So they have some salary there. Maybe it's not the Bulls, but someone like DeAndre Jordan is someone that I think they could pair together with the first round pick, because a late first round pick in this draft class is probably going to bring you little. So moving that's probably your best decision if you're the GM of the Nets.
I could see it. And we got to give Sean Mark some credit, I think. Obviously, having the balls to go out and get Harden in the middle of the season is one thing. But I think he does deserve some credit, because we saw those trades he made last year, the Bruce Brown trade, which
Yes.
ended up, excuse me, which ended up being a boon for the Nets. I know Landry Shamet didn't do a ton in that deal, but they definitely did a good job getting a lot out of these players without investing too much. Reggie Perry was the one rookie. We saw some flashes from him. Second round pick. The Nets have 3 second rounders in this upcoming draft, I believe. So considering that they're going to have to fill at least a couple of roster spots for cheap, having a couple of extra late lottery tickets in the draft in the end of the first, end of the second round, if they hit on at least one more player like that, you got to give them some credit. They're getting some good value out of these guys. They won't have the same draft resources or capital, but if considering the talent they already have on the roster, I don't think they really need it either. So I think we got to give Sean Mark some credit there. Thought Steve Nash did some really good things in his first season as a coach, and I'm curious to see what happens with his staff here, because a couple of assistants might be gone into next season.
Yeah, that's true. Definitely going to be some changes there with the Brooklyn Nets. But one more thing I want to bring up with them is their player development has been phenomenal over the last few seasons. You saw with Liabro, Lee, I can't ever say his name, but you know who it is, Lou. I'll call him Lou. Anyway, he came in the bubble and he just exploded. I mean, absolutely exploded, and everyone's like, "Who the heck is this guy?" And he really took off. And you saw that into this year with the Bruce Brown and the other players that they just really brought in. Flashes from Reggie Perry, you mentioned, just the consistent young players just finding a role and finding a way to play. And I think that speaks to the veterans they have on the team right now and also the development that they've had. And with the many second round picks, if you continue that success, maybe one of them cracks a bench role that gives them some meaningful minutes in 2022.
I mean, I think there's a pretty good chance of it at the very least. And if the Nets do have some more injury problems, we're definitely going to see it. Obviously, having the star power that the Nets do and the floor spacing that they usually have when they're healthy, that's going to help anybody who steps onto the court. But they absolutely have done a good job maximizing their players. We know they were great. They had that reputation under Kenny Atkinson, who's also under consideration for more jobs, by the way. So there's definitely going to be some changes on the outside for the Nets here on the coaching staff. staff. I expect a lot of the roster, or at least the core of it, to return. But I do think at least a couple of pretty key contributors will end up moving on if they end up getting offered contracts that Brooklyn won't be able to afford. But overall, I still think their future is pretty bright. I'm really excited and curious to see what they do in the draft and in the offseason. I expect them to be one of the more active teams in the league. And I also expect them to be arguably the most desired team for free agents to sign with, even for the veterans minimum, because a lot of guys want to get a ring and that might be their best shot.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And you mentioned the head coach or the coaches that are being up for consideration. Boston ended up hiring, or at least they're close to a deal with Ime Udoka, who's an assistant on staff. He's going to be taking over the Boston Celtics there. Brad Stevens, that's a big job for someone like Udoka to take over right there. So I'm excited to see how that turns out for them. Any words on what you think he could bring to the Celtics?
He's got a great reputation as one of the best assistant coaches in the league over the last couple of seasons, but I hate the Celtics, so I hope he sucks. Nothing personal there. And Udoka's not the only assistant coach who might end up with another job. Two other assistants are Mike D'Antoni and Jacques Vaughn, and both of them have been under consideration for jobs as well. And I expect at least one of them to end up, D'Antoni especially, I think, is a pretty good chance to land another head coaching job. So there'll definitely be some turnover, but I also expect Nash to be able to have more of a full off season to bring in some guys that he played with. Possibly Lloyd Pierce is a former teammate of his in college, I think, and I could see him being interested bringing him on as an assistant coach. There's definitely going to be some changes to the staff, but the personnel is going to be a lot more important in Brooklyn's case, so they should be all right. I think Udoka is going to be an interesting fit for the Celtics, just where their roster is, but we don't cover them, so let's not get into it.
Exactly. And you know how we feel about Jacques Vaughn, at least I am. I'm a big Jacques Vaughn guy. We talked about him in the bubble last year, just really taking over that team. But let's talk Islanders real quick. And the Islanders survived by the skin of their teeth in overtime, thanks to a turnover by Blake Coleman and a buried goal by Anthony Beauvillier. And before that happened, it was 2-1 late in the third period. Goal from Mayfield, buried that one, just an absolute snipe. And that got the Coliseum rocking. But I personally think that's the last game we're going to see at the Coliseum.
I hope you're right. I was hoping it would end with a loss. But Mayfield, first of all, that was an amazing shot. I got to give him some credit there. The Islanders are a really resilient bunch. I don't think anyone can deny that. They've been that way for several seasons now, but especially since Barry Trotz took over. And I want to get into him a little bit more here soon, but recap the last couple of games. This is the first series so far in the playoffs. The Islanders have been up 2-1, or excuse me, down 2-1 in each of the first three rounds. And in both Pittsburgh and Boston series, they won 3 straight. What didn't happen this time, because while the Islanders did hold on to game 4, thanks to a superhuman save from Ryan Pollock at the end of the game, McDonough had a wide open net with 2 seconds left, would have sent it to overtime. Lightning would have had all the momentum there. Tampa did manage to absolutely destroy the Islanders in game 5, so that put an end to that win 3 straight and move on pattern. But the Islanders back home with the wild Nassau Coliseum atmosphere, man, it's a tough place to play, always. The Islanders have a great fan base, I got to admit, and Nassau is a pit. It's a shithole, but it's also a really tough place to play a hockey game. And I don't mean that as the guy who hates the Islanders. I'm just saying, as somebody who's been there before, it's an ugly arena. There's a reason they're getting a new one. But game 7, they got another challenge, but I have no doubt that the Islanders are going to be up for it. And I expect a very, very competitive, tight scoring chance, low scoring game 7. We'll see who wins that one. And we'll see if they end up playing the winner of the series, if it ends up being Montreal or Vegas, who their opponent will be.
Yeah, man, that series is tough over there. I think DeBoer shot himself in the foot. I think it's going to go to Montreal. Carey Price has been legit. Caulfield scoring for them, but we're not talking them. We're talking about these Islanders who are up in game 7 here, back to Tampa Bay. Now, as a player, I don't know if you could go in the mindset of a player here, but join with me right here. If you go back to Amalie Arena, which you will on Friday, after getting thumped 8-0 in your last game, does that play any in your psyche as you hear the public address announcer and everybody coming out? It's the same feeling that you got your ass kicked last time. Does that feel anything towards you?
Honestly, I don't think it will. The Islanders are way too well coached and way too resilient for that. They also just won game six. Game five's already out of their memory. It was before game six even started. It's definitely out of their memory now. Obviously, not their proudest moment, but the good news is for them is it was clear that game was over by about 2 minutes into the second period. They were just able to flush it out quicker. It wasn't one of those emotionally heartbreaking losses. So, in a sense, I think it might be easier to move on from it. I don't think they give a fuck what building they're playing in. They shouldn't. They won game one at the beginning of this series. I know they're tough. They got to be loving playing in front of their home fans at Nassau and everything. But they have no reason not to be confident that they can go in and win game seven on the road. Not a guarantee, but they've shown they're more than capable of doing it. And we'll see what happens. I don't expect them to give up 28 odd man scoring rushes like they did in game five, the ridiculous number. But I do expect Tampa to bounce back a little bit, but this was their chance. They had a 2-goal lead here in game six. They had a chance to advance tonight. So if there's anyone who should question, are they going to be emotionally ready? I think you got to ask that about the Lightning. The Islanders have already proven they're resilient enough, but I think you got to question which team's more confident going into game seven. I don't think there's any doubt it's the Islanders.
The Islanders played a physical hockey game tonight, and you look at Game 6. They played a physical hockey game. Matt Martin was involved. Clutterbuck was involved. There's a lot of things going around. And on the first shift of the game for the Lightning, Nikita Kucherov got hurt. So I think his status is going to be up for question in Game 7. Obviously, things will transpire as the week goes on. But as you look ahead for Friday, Nikita Kucherov, this Lightning team has played without him all season because he was injured or whatever you want to believe that what he was. But right now he's actually injured. He's got an arm issue. Don't know his status, of course, right now. But if Kucherov cannot go, I think it's going to be dangerous for the Lightning because even without him this season, they've been a great hockey team. But the Islanders, I mean, they just play such a physical game. It's going to be demanding of you to never take a shift off like you're Blake Coleman.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to see the Lightning's forward ice time distribution. But if Kucherov is hurt for the game, nobody's going to cry the Lightning a pity party, considering they A, won the cup last year, and B, would still be playing $10 million over the salary cap. The Saints will go marching in no matter what. Yeah, see, I'm bringing that New York Saints thing back.
Nice.
But if Kucherov is out, it's going to make a huge difference. And he's obviously a dynamic player who's had an insane career with the Lightning here, and we know how important he is. Braden Point can only do so much offensively, but I want to actually tie that into the Islanders' best and most dynamic offensive player. That's Matt Barzal. Now, I'm not saying he should have been, but at the end of the second period in game five, he had that high hit at the end of the second period, got the game misconduct. Did you think that there was any thought that he might end up getting a 1-game suspension for game six? Because we've seen that before with similar hits.
I don't think so. I know this sounds bad, but it goes back to the officiating in the National Hockey League. Now, if you give Barzal that suspension, you're looking at the league going, okay, Tampa Bay's up 3-2. They've already dodged the salary cap with what they've done, and they've got to here on their little game. If you take the best and literally the only Islanders offensive threat off the ice, then what the heck are you doing? You're setting Tampa Bay up for an opportunity to just blow them out. It wasn't a hit that's like, oh my gosh, he needs to be suspended. Yes, we could talk about it, but I don't think that it was something where if you're the league, you're like, this is a pivotal player to take out of a series in a do or die situation. I don't think the hit was scary enough to where you could give him a 1-game suspension, as bad as that sounds.
I don't think like it was warranted of a suspension, but it just shows the inconsistencies. Like I'm not saying that I didn't want him to play or anything. The only reason I wouldn't want him to play is so the Islanders lose. So I'm a little biased here. But the all jokes aside, you can go back to the end of the regular season where Buchnevich had a very similar hit, and he got a 1-game suspension. And I'm not trying to say that they're both equal hits or equal severity or anything, but if you're going to call one a suspension, like yeah, they both have to be the same if you want any consistency with any of these rulings, whether it's regular season or playoffs. And the only reason I really questioned it is because remember when Mark Scheifele got a 4-game suspension for Winnipeg in the
Yes.
last round. So we have seen star players get suspended in these playoffs. Kadri's his own case, but we saw it with Mark Scheifele. So I think it was at least fair to question whether it would happen to Barzal. Obviously, very beneficial for the Islanders that he did not get the suspension, and he was buzzing all over the ice tonight, especially in the third period. We know what a great player he is, but it's definitely something he's fortunate just with the inconsistencies of the player safety department. We all know about that, considering it was an unnecessary hit that he did out of frustration at the end of a blowout loss. It could have completely screwed them up for game 6 tonight, but fortunately for the Islanders, it didn't end up costing them anything that they hadn't already lost in game 5. And they're going to be full strength going into game 7. And the Lightning, we'll see what happens with Kucherov. If he's a factor, obviously, that'll be a much bigger advantage for Tampa Bay. But if not, or if he's similar to what James Harden was for the Nets, where he's not 100%, not creating those scoring chances against a really good defensive team, Tampa's screwed.
Mm-hmm. And you look at Braden Point. Braden Point's on a 9-game playoff point streak, which is absolutely insane. And you saw the goal he scored tonight where Pulak, or not Pulak, it was Pelech right over him. And he's sitting there. He had nowhere to go. Pelech's playing phenomenal defense. He kicks it with his skate to his stick. Freaking backhand goal. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Braden Point's been on a tear so far in this series. But I mean, that just shows how tight knit this Islanders defense is on what they're doing. I mean, to a T, they had a great close up shot of him absolutely writing him off and giving him a physical check there to try to eliminate the goal. But Braden Point continued to do it. I was actually a little bit, now maybe I'm an outlier here. I was a little bit shocked that no one was talking about a goaltending situation here going into game 6, because Varlamov got lit up like a Christmas tree to start game 5. I thought maybe you consider Sorokin here.
I think you are in the minority there. I think that would have been really stupid. Varlamov's one of the biggest reasons the Islanders got this far. I understand he had a bad game and Sorokin came in, but I think it would have been an interesting message to send if you're Barry Trotz to say, hey, well, this is our goalie who had a top 5 year. Let's not play him in an elimination game. You know, the Islanders' first elimination game of the playoffs. I personally would have kept him in. Now, if he had a bad game in game 4, or if the Islanders were down, if he had 2 bad games in a row, then I might have understood it. But one bad game, I think that's a little too quick to jump the gun. And I do want to give Barry Trotz some special shout out here. I mean, Lou Lamoriello for the Islanders won the GM of the Year award for the 2nd year in a row. First year, I honestly thought it made sense. This year, not so much. I really don't. I think Barry Trotz deserves a lot more credit for how well the Islanders have done than he is getting. So he's shown the most important asset of a coach, that he can maximize the most out of his players and get the most out of his team with 2 straight deep playoff runs here. This one's not over yet, unfortunately, right? He's also shown the ability to get the most out of his line pairings and defense pairs, and also the very good use of his timeouts. I think he's used them a couple of times. He used it in tonight's game. There was the game in the Bruins series where they were up 5-2. Boston cut it to 5-4, calls the timeout. Boston doesn't get another shot. So I think he does really have a good feel for the pulse of his team. When they're off, he knows that, and he knows how to kind of correct the tide a little bit. And having that guiding hand is a huge factor, especially in a playoff series. And the one that we're watching right now is going 7 games one way or the other. The Islanders would have been eliminated by now if Trotz didn't have that kind of sense of calm, sense of understanding behind the bench, and also if Tristan Jarry didn't suck, but that's a different point.
I 100% agree with you there. And I guess the only thing you could make the case for there with the executive GM of the year or whatever it was, I see the only trade that really pulled off was the Kyle Palmieri bringing in Palmieri to this team. But you also got to factor in Barry Trotz lost Anders Lee earlier this season, and he found a way to just gel and mix up the line pairings a little bit to see who was going to play on what line. He got scoring out of JG Padjo. He's moving guys around. And I mean, that's just, that shows how good a coach is. We talk about his defense all the time, but the way he's mixed and matched, the way that he has made the offensive matchups pretty advantageous for a team that doesn't have a lot of offensive firepower. He's done a great job as a head coach. And I think he matches up well with John Cooper, who I did not believe was a great head coach until I saw him make the adjustment after getting eliminated from Columbus to moving on to going to the Stanley Cup. He finally learned how to make adjustments in game. So this is a great head coaching battle, and it's going to be great here in Game 7.
Yeah, the Islanders are fortunate the Capitals didn't want to pay him after the Trotz won a Stanley Cup there in 2018. But kudos to them; they were smart enough to recognize he is worth some money, and he's getting dangerously close to getting the Islanders back in the final. I hope that doesn't happen, honestly. But he's a great coach, and Lamoriello. I thought we have to remember here: Palmieri hasn't given them a ton of offense, and they gave up a first-round pick to do it. So I really don't get the GM of the year for this time. I did get it in 2020. Overall, though, it's been one hell of a series. We've seen a little bit of everything. It's gone back and forth. Tampa's going to be on home ice for this, but even ignoring everything else, they got the target on their back for two reasons. They won the Cup last year, and they eliminated the Islanders at the exact same point in the playoffs last season. So it's not like anyone's forgotten about that. Islanders are going to be out for blood on Friday night. So I do like their chances. They should be confident going into the game, and especially if Kucherov is not a factor or not playing, that'll definitely only enhance their chances.
100%. It's going to be a great Game 7. I'm looking forward to it. Amalie Arena, 7:30 p.m., 8 o'clock, whatever it is. You know what it is. Game 7, NBC. Should be a lot of fun, and I'm excited for it. But for the Big City Sports Podcast, it's been real. Great episode today, going with the Nets and the Islanders. Going to get into more Islanders talk if they move on. If not, we'll talk about their season being over. And we got some baseball coming up here on the Big City Sports Podcast. Training camp's a month or so away, so maybe we get into some NFL talk as it gets closer. But outside of that, not really much. Be sure to check us out on all platforms. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Like, subscribe, leave a comment, all that good stuff. But until next time, for Swig, I'm Dylan Kearns. We will see you next time.